Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, your GM, and we are here this morning on Behind the Screen to talk about plotting for games. Behind the Screen is just a show where I take 20 minutes, drink a cup of coffee, chat with people in the chat, and like Mr. Bob Crumb. Welcome, sir. And we just talk about gaming. We talk about game design, adventure design, board games, board game reviews. Speaking of role-playing game reviews, Bob, I've got something that you are going to want to see. This is the Hellboy 5th edition role-playing game that just came out. My friend Ben got it in and was gracious enough to let me take a spin through it. It's got some really great innovations for 5th edition that may be worth stealing for a ton of other games as well. I think we're entering into this time of the 5th edition design space where we're going to actually start to see some very interesting innovations in it. Up until this point, we've had a very simple kind of logical progression of people designing in the 5th edition space, new subclasses, new monsters, adventures, that sort of thing. I don't know why you don't have this, Bob, but I will send you a link to where you can buy it. Ben got the Kickstarter set, so it's got just some gorgeous material in it, and this may be one of the coolest things. Let me see if I can show this off. The back cover space is a timeline of the Hellboy universe, all of the comics and where they fit in the timeline. So we may do a review of this at some point here soon, because I know Bob loves the Hellboy loves Hellboy. He and Ben got me into it, and so maybe we'll do a review of it. I'm just reading through it right now. The classes are very interesting. The roles, you get a little bit more of a life path system. You pick your origin, whether you're a remarkable human or a construct or cursed or something like that. You get two backgrounds, one for what you did kind of before you came to the BRPD, and then one for like how long you've been in the BRPD. And then it's got I don't know how fiddly it would be at the table, Bob, but every time you roll a d20, you also roll a d10. And on a 10, you get a point of ingenuity, and on a 1, you get a point of doom. So something bad happens, and the doom tracker kind of ticks up as the GM collects more doom going forward. I like it. And all of the different types of monsters, you have like general doom spends that the GM always has access to, and then each category of monster, like demon or Nazi or undead, they all have their own unique doom mechanics that you can spend points on. So when you're fighting undead, the GM unlocks these new abilities that they can spend doom points on to make the undead encounter a little bit more flavorful. So we've got that. Another one that's coming out in May that Bob and I are both really excited about is the Dark Souls version of 5th edition. It'll be interesting to see that one out. Oh, and Bob, they added injuries in this. So you still have hit points, you still have death saves, you still die when you fail your death saves. But anytime you take damage greater than your constitution, you have to make a check, and if you fail, you get injured, and injuries start subtracting from die rolls, prevent you from adding your attribute or your proficiency modifier, so you can get worn down while still have a ton of hit points. So I'm glad to see you on here so we could discuss this, because we all love Hellboy. Or at least, I don't know if everyone loves Hellboy, but Bob and I love Hellboy. We could get into a whole discussion of not everything is made for everyone, and that is sort of an okay thing. But today we're going to talk about plotting adventures. Are you saying that Obama and Santa like Hellboy, or that you like Obama, Santa, and Hellboy kind of together, Bob? Oh, we all love Hellboy. Okay. So there are two things that I typically use for plotting out adventures. And if you've listened to the Grand Campaign, whose third episode will be going live Saturday morning, we talk about how in a Grand Campaign, one of the advantages for a GM is that if you do your prep work in advance, then you're spending all of your time at the session kind of immersed in the world. And I tend to do a lot. Most of, I would say, 90% of my prep for a game happens before we even hit session zero. The world building, the faction building, the plot building. Well, not plot building. Really, the potential for plots, right? Because really, all you need is half dozen factions, most of which are cultists, and a couple of powerful magical artifacts or rituals that are out on the horizon, and then a world that makes sense to set them in. And that's really where I get when I'm plotting. I get to the point where I have enough, I'm familiar enough with the world that I know how to make rulings and rules at the table and plot changes at the table based off what my characters do. I try to run a very player-driven um, game. But there are two things that kind of combine with that once we start going. And the first is the consequence list. And we'll take about 10 minutes and talk about that. So the consequence list is something that I actually started doing when I was running games at Bob's. Bob, this goes all the way back to our gaming group at your house when we were playing twice a week and we were playing Burning Wheel and Shadowrun. And what I discovered there is the easiest way for me to create fun and engaging scenarios wasn't to do something on my own, but was to respond to in-world events that players did. Rook, good to see you, man. Congratulations. Rook has been subscribed to our channel for 29 months. That's awesome. Rook, thank you, sir. Cheers. I miss those days too, Bob. That was a great gaming group. So what I would do is at the end of every session, and this is something that 13th Age uses as well. So at the end of every session in 13th Age, the GM is supposed to ask, hey, what is something that you liked that happened tonight that you would like to see become a reoccurring element in the campaign? That's really more player focused. The consequence list is a GM focused tool that just says what happened tonight that will have consequences going forward. So did the PCs piss someone off? Did the PCs mishandle something? Did the PCs make an enemy? And so essentially I just have a running list of plot threads that the players have left dangling. So to kind of go back to this Shadowrun game that I was talking about, there were several ones that came up pretty heavily and were pretty intense for the arc of the campaign. Things like one of the characters kept waking up at the start of every adventure with blood on their hands and in strange places, ammo missing. Never investigated that. Never went to anyone in the group to say, how could this help? And so the character was slowly being taken over by an AI, and that actually the can kept getting kicked down the road, and every time the can gets kicked down the road in one of my games, the problem gets worse. And we'll talk about that when we get to the second tool. Things like the group needed a group of smugglers to get in and out of Denver, and they met these people. And the weird thing about these people were they were a group of coyotes, but two of the players thought it was weird, so used their cyberware to kind of look at the people in the room, and they didn't show up on heat scans, on infrared. Well, they didn't do anything with that. This was a group of vampires that were smugglers, and never investigated that, which was fine. So I just had, on my consequence list, this gang is a gang of vampire smugglers. And then one of the characters decided, well, my character's looking for love. I'm going to go meet up with one of these people, and ended up getting turned into a vampire because at no point did the group actually kind of pick up that thread, which is fine. Right, one of our roles as GMs is to just keep throwing threads in front of players. Let the players react to. I don't think that I've frozen Bob. Does it look like I've frozen? We'll see here. Oh, so, all right. Thanks, Becca. Sorry, it's our job to throw out plot threads. I think this is why. So it's interesting. We're going to talk about this on Saturday with the Grand Campaign, right? The old school gaming movement would say that the campaign or the hex map or the map, the setting is core to the game. The new school kind of movement says the individual player or the overarching narrative is the heart of the game. And I think the grand campaign kind of merges those well together, because it's really like the plots that the players pick up that tie back to the setting are what are important to the game. We'll talk about that on Saturday. But essentially, my philosophy of DMing or GMing is keep throwing hooks out. The players will eventually pick up the ones that they want, and that's where your campaign, that's what you weave together for your campaign. So the consequence list is a way for the GM to just easily track player agency. That's how I look at it. The players have made these choices. What are the consequences of these choices? The players have chosen to do X, which means they left Y undone. Who is upset that one of these two things happened or didn't happen? And that allows you to build a relationship web with your players' choices and the world. Player agency isn't that choices don't have consequences, right? Sometimes we want to say, well, if we made that choice, we don't want bad things to happen. But that's sort of not how player agency works. Like, if you actually want your characters to have effect on the world, sometimes there are bad choices that get made. Going to meet up with a vampire in the Shadowrun game, consequences to that. Even worse consequences for, what I would call, I don't want to put this. I've heard stories. I've been blessed not to have any of this happen in my games recently, but we all hear the horror stories of players who make very awful decisions in games, and those also have consequences and fallout to that. So, consequence lists. Just have a page in your journal, in your notebook, on your campaign website, in your Scrivener, in your OneNote, wherever, however, Notability, all of these things are places where I write down my consequence list. So, for example, if you've watched the Torg game on Tuesday night, Padre, good to see you this morning. One of the consequences that are kind of hanging out is that the group has pissed off the Triumvirate. Deathhawk was the result of a critical complication card on the drama card, so this supervillain team got involved. They managed to wound Deathhawk and drive him off, and Deathhawk is one member of this supervillain trio called the Triumvirate. So now the group has the Triumvirate after them. They've also managed to attack and steal things from Dr. Mobius's military forces. So now there are warrants out from the military, and that's going to stay at a certain level and bleed off as the game goes on. But these are consequences not of choices that necessarily I have made in the game, but these are in responses to the choices that the players make. If you have a good inciting scene, a moment like you're opening in your campaign, the quest board, the meeting at the inn, the traveling from one place to another to deliver something, and then start with a consequence list, what you'll find is that, at least for me, GM burnout isn't as high because I always have a well that I can immediately go back to and say, I don't know what's happening. Let me see what's on the consequence list. What jumps out at me? And that's my hooks for the rest of the adventure going forward. Now, the other thing that I use is I use a simple tool that I've just sort of called plot tracking. I'll share, this is I don't know that any of my players have ever seen this before, so this is really stepping behind the screen. But I have just this simple Word doc that I print out for every game. I have it set up so it's got two sides to it that's identical, and essentially it is, I think, 8 columns across, and this is just how I keep track of it. So I come up with plots, just plot ideas, whether from the consequence list or maybe from the initial inciting moment. So things like, I'll use my 2E D&D game that I'm doing right now. So there are several orders of necromancers that are at war. So each one of those necromantic cults has a specific goal in mind. So I would put the plot, the goal in mind. So whether it's to resurrect Caius, the worm god, whether it's to recover the 6 shards of the Scandalin crown, whether it's even just to open the gates of Aufstrag and take up lordship and dominion of the horned gods area. These are all plots that are currently going down. So I list out my plots. And if you're a GM running a game, you probably already have 4 or 5 that are immediately coming to mind. Oh, hey, there's this thing that's been going on. There's this thing that's been going on. There's this thing that's been going on. So then I just make quick notes of who's involved in that plot. NPC names, cult names, faction names, that sort of thing. Who are the main players of each plot? And then essentially, I try to break everything up into 3 to 5 steps. So what is the current step that each of these plots are on? And I do this at the start of basically all of my session preps. I look at my plot map to just see what is going on, because this informs both me on the larger world and sort of helps me drop hints about other things that are going on. And that way, one, the world seems a little bit more real, at least to my players, that time is moving forward. And so in like let's go to the 6 shards of the Scandalin crown. The first thing is that they're trying to locate the first piece from one of the towers of the moon. And there are 8 towers, and the cult doesn't know which one it is. And so essentially, the timer on that, I try to write a little timing note. When they find the first piece, that will be step A is done. And so I just have a note on my 2E game that says, hey, every week I roll a D8, and if I roll a certain number, they have figured out which of the 8 towers has the shard. And as soon as that's done, then I move to the next step. So I try to list out and not all of these plots are always going to be contiguous. It's not like, the Cult of the Worm Gods plot is on step B, so therefore the Shard of the Crown is on step B. No, what you're gonna find is that you're gonna end up having multiple plots on multiple different steps, and the players are going to investigate certain things, and they're going to let other things fall behind, and they may jump into one plot at step C only to jump over to another plot that's about to explode on step E, and that's okay, right? This is just for our benefit as a GM to kind of keep track. And so I also try to write in every box, what's the trigger for going to the next step? And at the top of the next box, what's the omen? And so what I mean by omen is, what are the rumors, what are the tales, what are the signs that the player characters are going to get that something else is going on in the world? And here's the thing. If you've got a group of PCs and you're only running with one group, again, we'll talk about that on the Grand Campaign on Saturday. There are going to be times where plots advance beyond the player's ability to deal with them. And that's okay. The last column, which you can't really see because it's hidden by my screen, is the fallout. What happens if these things go on? So for the Shards of the Crown arc, if the players do not discover or interfere with the shards being located, then the crown is reforged and they're able to awaken this old Lich Emperor, which would be bad because then the whole new plot will be the Lich Emperor. The fallout will be the Lich Emperor is awake and the group is now starting to gather allies. That's a whole new plot. And so the idea is that these plots, if they're stopped, awesome. If they're not, they roll into new plots and the world keeps getting a little bit more real, a little bit more alive, a little bit more... Real is kind of the word I'm going for, right? That secondary world effect. Yes, as Phantom said, there's the fallout, big explosion, PCs walk away. But think about, I don't know why this popped into my mind. There's a specific episode or issue of this that I think is, but Giants in the Playground, they're the Order of the Stick webcomic that's still going on. I think I get caught up every couple of years and then inevitably forget and let it let it fall behind. But right, the group doesn't actually get involved until some of the gates are already destroyed. And so that's always the time when heroes shine, when it looks like it's too late, or when things continue to escalate. And so for me, this is one really easy for me to keep track of. This may not work for you. It may work great for you. So I try to keep it simple because I find that simpler tools I'm more likely to use more often. I know that some of my players, Becca being one of them in the game, uses something similar to this, but instead of a consequence list, Becca keeps a plot thread list for the group. So at the start of sessions when we wrap an adventure, and I say, okay, hey, we're starting a new season in Jackals, we're starting a new season in RuneQuest, or hey, you've dealt with this threat in our Tanar game. What are you guys doing next? Becca is usually the one who says, okay, well, here are all of the outstanding things because I know that JM is keeping track of these things. And that just comes from experience. So if you end up using either of these tools, the consequent list or the plotting map, please let me know. I would love to hear how other people use these. If you have different tools that you use, please feel free to comment in the comment section and let me know. I'd love to engage in a conversation with you guys about this. These are just two tools that I use, not necessarily tools that everyone may enjoy or find useful. It all depends on your GM style. But for me, these are tools that I have refined and used over, many years of game mastering. I think I'm getting close to where I've been GMing for about 30 years. So these are two of the tools that are the most helpful for me. So next week on Behind the Screen, we're going to look at some good books for influences. If you are looking for influences, it's a question I always get, which is, hey, what influences me as a writer and a GM? I'm going to talk about that on Thursday. And on Tuesday, I think we're going to get into Ekiazaru and really kind of start talking about the outskirts and designing the levels of this dungeon. So Padre says, the issue I'm dealing with is how to make the PC's choices important in the world when the plot requires the Dark Lord to win. I want to know what your game is about, Padre. Interesting. So the story at this point, it sounds like in your game, is that the Dark Lord is on the cusp of winning, and is this like a prologue, or is this something kind of after the fact that you're looking at? Speaking of 5th edition design and the Dark Lord winning, Bob, I don't know if you've heard, but they're also doing a 5th edition reboot of the Midnight setting from Fantasy Flight, which is basically Lord of the Rings if Sauron corrupted Aragorn and Boromir and Galadriel and Gandalf, and yeah, welcome to the Third Age, the Age of Orcs. Oh, right, Padre, the Isle Invasion. You're running the Tord game before the High Lord, or as part of the invasion. Oh man, that is an interesting. That would be akin to running a Star Wars game set in the last years, leading right up to Order 66. How do you have a compelling story when in the end everyone knows the Empire falls or the Dark Lord takes over? I think maybe that's what we'll do on Tuesday. We could talk about running games in canon and how to make adjustments for that. I think that's what we'll talk about on Tuesday, Padre. I think if you're okay with it, I think that would be just a delightful discussion to have here on Behind the Screen. So that's what we'll do on Tuesday. I'll ponder it over the weekend, and maybe we can get people in the chat and figure out what's going on. Get some discussion around this idea of canon games and running games before major events. All right, let's plan on that Tuesday morning. That's our plan. So, if you like what we do, please consider checking out all of the other places you can find the Iconic Podcast and Iconic Production. Follow us here on Twitch to get notifications when we go live on Behind the Screens or any of our other live shows. Jump over to YouTube and subscribe there. Hit the like button there. Leave a comment here so that the algorithm knows, hey, people are engaging and like this content. If you'd like to support us, you can jump over to the patreon.com/Iconic Production. That's us. We have a Discord channel that is available to all of our patrons. We get to do new cool content like this for you guys because of the patronage of our patrons. So thank you as always to that. And so we'll be back on Tuesday to discuss canon games and ways to deal with canon, especially running a role-playing game before a major plot point. I'm looking forward to that. Padre. Thanks for bringing that up, and thanks for adding to the discussion here on Behind the Screen. So we'll be back on Tuesday. I am JM, your GM. This is our Behind the Screen, again, where we just take time to step behind the GM screen and talk about gaming. So I'll be back on Tuesday with more content. Thank you all for joining us, and we will see you then. If you're available Saturday morning at 8 a.m. Central, the Grand Campaign 3rd episode goes live on our Twitch channel, and we will be diving into that. Until then, everyone have a great one, and I will stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming, and I'll see you on Saturday morning, and then on Tuesday for more Behind the Screen.